Are we ready for this? That's my vibe. All right. So today we have Iz kicking us off. Absolute honour and privilege to be the first one up. Come on down. Folks, warm welcome, warm cheers. Let's make everybody excited about coming up here. All right. Iz, over to you.
Hello. Yes. Oh, thank you.
Enjoy.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Iz, and I am a product manager at GearSet. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm super excited to get started. So, as I said, I work at GearSet, and GearSet is the leading DevOps solution for people developing on Salesforce. And at GearSet, we essentially became Salesforce partners last year, which is really, really exciting. As a product manager, companies do this very, very differently. And at GearSet, this does actually look like more than just taking loads of pictures in photo booths. It looks like researching problems, delivering value iteratively. So at GearSet, we release multiple times a day, which is pretty remarkable. It also involves working cross-team with engineers, UX designers, sales, marketing, etc. And we measure success against metrics to continuously improve. Product managers at GearSet are responsible for the full product lifecycle, so discovery through validation and launch. So I want to set a quick agenda. I want to talk about the importance of customer research and why it's also really hard to do it well. I then want to talk about a book by Rob Fitzpatrick, which is called The Mum Test, and it aims to alleviate some of these challenges of customer research. The tagline of The Mum Test is, "You shouldn't ask your mum whether she likes your idea because she loves you and she will lie to you." And then I want to talk a bit about the Jobs to be Done framework. What do we do with all this customer data that we've just got from our research? And then how do we prioritise it? So, I've got two aims today. And this is my second ever talk, and I only did my first one last week, so it's pretty new. But my first aim is to hopefully give you at least one interesting thing to take away with you. And then the second aim is for me personally to feel like this cat. No stress, just vibing. So, some of you may be wondering, what on earth is Jobs to be Done? I'm just going to give a quick explanation and definition to illustrate this. Jobs to be Done is one of our core values at GearSet, so it's obviously quite relevant here. And it was created by Bob Moesta in the mid-90s, and he has successfully launched 3,500 products in his career, which is pretty remarkable. And he said, when faced with a job that needs doing, the user essentially hires a product to do that job. So it's about us giving them a product which can enable them to achieve their job to be done. So let's think about an example for that. Someone could be digging a hole in the sand, and they may need a spade in order to do that. It's the idea that they are hiring the spade to do that job. They don't need a spade for any other reason than to dig that hole. So it's the notion that our product provides a tool for the customer to be able to achieve that job. So now I've just given you a bit of context about the Jobs to be Done framework. Let's talk about why it's really important to do research. Have you ever accidentally fallen in love with a solution before you really understand the problem? It is a really common mistake for product managers and teams to make. It can literally just look like feeling super passionate about an idea and feeling like, I've got this idea that I think will be really good. That can cause us to jump forwards and be solution-based rather than problem-based. And if we ensure that we're doing our research around this, it can kind of just anchor us back a little bit and ensure that we're making our product on fact and not just the first problem we hear about or the one that's shouted about the loudest. Secondly, have you ever taken a feature request at face value? So this could look like a stakeholder just saying, can I please just have a quick drop-down list? It won't take very long. I just need a text box. Also, again, very easy to do, an easy mistake to make. But if we don't really dig into the why, we don't understand the underlying need. So let's talk about an example of that. Someone may come to you and say, can I please have a bucket? And you could give them the bucket. That's the solution that they've asked for. But if you dig further and understand the why, you may say, why? And they may say, because I've got a leak. And then if you dig and probe further, you may find out the leak is in the house and it's actually quite big. And giving them the bucket wouldn't actually be a very good solution. So I know this is a pretty unrealistic example, but it does illustrate my point. Giving them the bucket would essentially be putting a plaster over the problem that they're having without really understanding what they actually need. So it's the notion that we need to really, really try and understand the why behind what we're doing. But we just don't want to understand why, and we don't want to just understand their problems. We want to talk to our stakeholders. We want to understand their world. They do this day in, day out, so we need to try and take a walk in their shoes. And when we do this, it's important to always be empathetic and try and understand their pains. One way to do this is called walking the gemba. The gemba is a Japanese word which means the real place. And it was developed by Toyota as part of the lean methodology, and it essentially means going to the place that the work happens and talking to the people that are doing the work. So this can look like making sure you're talking to the users rather than their managers about them. Walking the gemba essentially allows us to understand their world. By seeing what they do, we can understand their pains and their process, and we can challenge our assumptions of how we think users use our product and how they actually do. And usually that is quite surprising and potentially quite different. So, put your hands up if you have ever used a Segway. A few people. Put your hands up if you have ever purchased a Segway. I don't think anyone has actually. There was someone in my talk last week who actually had, which is quite cool. But it does illustrate my point quite well. So in this section, I want to just give a bit of a case study around when research was hurried or it wasn't done well. The Segway was developed in 2001, and it had some pretty high profile investors. So Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, they invested in the Segway, and they thought it was going to revolutionise urban transportation. They thought it was going to be the way that commuters get to and from work, but it was developed in top secret, so they did not understand or talk to their users at all. And essentially, if they had, they would have found out that the jobs to be done for commuters is fast, affordable and reliable transportation from their home to their place of work. Coming in at over $5,000 and only being able to be used on pavements meant that these jobs to be done weren't achieved. So I think it's just really, really important to understand their market, understand the jobs to be done. If they'd known this, maybe they would have tailored their product differently and there could have been a different outcome. But obviously, judging by the amount of people that have bought a Segway in this room, it didn't really land where they thought it was going to. So, we know why we need to do research, but why is it so hard? Product research is difficult because it requires navigating the complexities of human behaviour. So it could be that people find it difficult to articulate what they actually mean when they're talking to you. Maybe they don't really know how to convey what they're trying to say. Or they could be influenced by social desirability bias. Or maybe they're just trying to recall a process that they did, but they haven't done it for a while and they feel a bit rusty about how to recall it. But it's not just them, it's the interviewers as well. And imagine we have just developed a prototype that we feel really passionate about and we really, really like it. And we take it to our customers and they say, this is not going to meet our needs, this is not going to solve our problems. This can be really hard to take on board. It's in our human nature to want to hear good feedback, positive feedback, but that isn't always accurate. So we, as interviewers, essentially need to make sure that we're prioritising the needs of the customer over our attachment to our work. So, the Mum Test by Rob Fitzpatrick aims to try and just alleviate some of the challenges and set us up for acing our customer interviews and our research. The Mum Test talks about the customer throughout, But this could be any stakeholder really, so it could be talking to your sales team about a process that they do and understanding the pains and bottlenecks in that process. Or it could be reaching out to prospective customers. So the mum test essentially is the notion that if you've ever asked your mum or a close family member or a friend if they love your idea, maybe they'll say, yes darling, lovely idea, and they just want to get on with their day and they don't really have the time. Or maybe they say, yes, I love it, because they're your mum, they probably would lie to you because they want to support you. It's the notion that many products are still made that customers don't want or need. Clayton Christensen, who also developed the Jobs to be Done framework alongside Bob Movesta, said that 30,000 products are made every year and 95% of them fail. But how can this be? People do research, they know they need to do research. So what actually happens here? I think there are a lot of assumptions made that the problem that the customer feels is so strong and so real that they will first investigate, then test, and then part ways with their money in order to use your product. So I'm going to first of all do a little bit of a quiz, and then I'm going to talk about some key takeaways of the mum test and how we applied it to a project at GearSet. So I want to talk to you about some good questions to ask customers and some bad questions to ask customers, and it talks a lot about this in the book. So if you think it's a good question, go like this, and if you think it's a bad question, put your thumb down, and also because we haven't talked about it yet and I don't want to be too mean, you can just go like this if you don't really know. Okay, so what do you think of my idea? Is this a good or a bad question? Yeah, this is not a very good question. We have to be super wary of compliments when we're talking to customers. It's so easy for them to promise something they don't actually mean. And this kind of question invites future hypotheticals, like, yes, I love this idea, I would buy it. It's not too useful for us. What tools or solutions do you currently use to deal with this? Good or bad question? Yes, this is a great question because it essentially allows us to understand if someone that we're talking to, their pain is real enough for them to already be looking elsewhere and looking at different options. It also allows us to do a bit of market research and understand what's already out there. Would you buy a product which did X? Something. This is also not a very good question because, again, it sort of invites future hypotheticals. Someone could say, I will buy your product for £1 million, but unless that is literally sitting in your bank account, been transferred over, it doesn't actually mean anything. So we want to avoid these kind of false promises. And finally, who else is involved when you try to deal with this problem? Yes, this is a great one because it identifies key stakeholders and decision makers, that they're like highlighted to us. Who do we want to try and involve? It also lets us know how far-reaching the problem is. Does it just affect that one user? Does it affect their whole team? So yeah, that's a good question to be asking. There are a lot of cat pics in this presentation. So I want to introduce a project that I did at GearSet and how we applied the mum test to our research. But first I have to set a bit of context. If any of these concepts don't make sense, it literally doesn't matter. When I introduce the project in the next slide, it will probably make more sense. But I work on our automation product at GearSet, which is our pipelines product. It essentially looks at automating a lot of the things that need to be done in order to deploy, and it ensures best practices in DevOps. So I think I have a laser thing. Oh yeah. So, for example, if I'm a developer or an admin and I'm developing a drop-down list on Salesforce, I can make my change here in my sandbox or my dev environment, and then once it's done, I can promote it to the next environment, which could be UAT for users to do some testing. Then I can essentially deploy it down the pipeline all the way to production until it's live. Pipelines automates a lot that needs to be done behind the scenes, and it also integrates with like your Git or your Jira, so it's a super cool product, but it is quite tricky to set one up in some cases. So we wanted to sort of analyse how we can make the setup a bit better, and And for example, on this screen, there's just quite a lot of options that the user has to go through, and I think it could potentially be a bit overwhelming. Here we have an option. We would only ever really recommend this one. We wouldn't ever recommend that the user uses this one. And secondly, they would never really unselect new and changed items. The user would only really ever select or unselect deleted items. So we wanted to talk to our users, and we understand this because we spoke to our users and understood the problems that they were having, and we essentially were able to build this into our solution by using the key takeaways of the mum test. So for example, we analysed it and baked in some of these options to the pipeline, how it's already set up. And we also made sure that the decision points that the customer had were really key. So could we remove some of those and allow them to do them in settings instead? We wanted to analyse what is actually essential for a user to get set up on their pipeline and start using it. So let's talk about how we did that. We wanted to identify if our problem was real enough for the customer. And Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. So we need to essentially make sure that our problem is real and real enough for us to invest our resources into. And at this stage, if you find out that it's not, that is completely fine. This is the stage that you want to be finding that out at. We don't want to put our time and resources into something that we later find out wasn't worth it. So how did we do that at GearSet? We talked to a range of different stakeholders. We talked to people in our CSM team who look after our customers at GearSet. We talked to the team that troubleshoot their issues. And then we talked to 20 plus customers who had recently gone through the pipeline setup journey and understood their experiences with it. But how did we know it was real enough? It can be really hard to see the wood through the trees of what customers actually mean. A customer could say things like always or might. But when they say always, do they actually mean every single time? So one way that we alleviate this at GearSet is by asking the customer to screen share. And by seeing what they did or what they would do, allows us to anchor our research into fact and not just like their sort of fluffy, potentially fluffy words in which they would choose to describe it. So we could, once we've screen shared, we can ask them questions like, which options would you select and why? What part did you have a problem with and why? And we can really like get into the nitty gritty of what they actually did. Another key takeaway from the mum test is to start broad with your questions and then zoom in. So for example, you might start by saying, can you tell me about your team structure and how your role fits in with this? Essentially the aim of this segment is to build a picture of who you're talking to. Who are you talking to in terms of, did they directly set up the pipeline? Did they work with the team that set up the pipeline? What is the size of their team and like the technical maturity? What is the culture like, the change management culture, etc. So just building up that image might help us to sort of identify where we need to be using our time in our project. And then next you want to zoom in a little bit. Who was involved in the process and what help did they need? But look, we're still not talking about the actual problems that they had. We're still trying to build that image and build that context. So here they might talk about the documentation that they used, or if they had to get in contact with anyone at GearSet, how was that process? So again, we're just keeping it still quite broad. And then finally, you do want to zoom in. Tell me about a time your setup wasn't correct. Now we want to be asking those sort of zoomed in, hard-hitting questions and really understanding sort of case studies around common areas where people went wrong. But once we've built up that overall broad picture, it's way easy for us to understand who we're talking to a bit more. And finally, there's so many takeaways in this book, but I only have time to talk about 3. But silence is golden, which is actually a really hard one to do. In the United States, it only takes 4 seconds before a period of silence in conversation becomes uncomfortable. And I feel like, I hope that was 4 seconds because that felt pretty uncomfortable. But essentially, we want to be letting our stakeholders think, and we want them to have time to process what they've just told us. We also want to make sure that they have the time to speak. If we get to a moment of silence from our interview, it can be really easy to think, right, what question am I going to ask next? I just need to fill that silence. We can predict that a silence lasted way longer than it actually did, and that's because it feels uncomfortable. So if we can get comfortable with a bit of silence, two things can happen. First of all, the customer might feel that silence, and they might say something else. Second of all, it allows them to just process what they've just said. They're talking a lot about things that they do in their day-to-day, and if we just give them a bit of breathing space, then maybe they'll have that like golden nugget of value moment of, oh, actually, we also had this problem the other day, or actually, I've missed that bit out of the process. So we need to let them just have a bit of breathing room. Sometimes that's where the real value comes out. I analysed our last 6 calls in the setup project, and on our side at GearSet, we spoke 35% of the time on average, and the interviewee spoke 69.5% of the time. And this is like quite a good split to be aiming for, because we are there to learn from our stakeholders. So we want to be ultimately listening to them. We want to ensure that we are giving them the time to talk and process. So, jobs to be done. Going back a little bit to the framework that I introduced earlier, Bob Moesta said that the struggling moment is the seed of all innovation. And in that struggling moment is when change happens. So if we think about that hiring a spade example, at the point that they were struggling, maybe they're like digging the hole with their hands or something, and they're like, this isn't really working out. At that time, they're having a struggling moment. They're looking for what another option is. It's at that time that we want to be looking at what jobs to be done they need. If a customer doesn't have that struggling moment, they won't be looking for that change. So, we had feedback from customers that in Salesforce, their like native deployment tool change sets could feel a bit clunky or hard to use. Enough customers had that same struggling moment that they looked for a solution, and this is where GearSet may be that solution. But you can also use the struggling moment in your personal lives as well. And in that struggling moment is like when we grow and when we change. And I really like thinking about it in the context of one of our values at GearSet, embrace discomfort. So we achieve the most growth when we do step out of our comfort zone. And this could be, for example, when you're on a run or you're on a hike and you really want to give up, but you push through. Or it could be when you're giving your second ever talk at a conference. But there is a reason that I wanted to do this. In a study in 2019, the top, most major 18 tech conferences were analysed, and there were only 25% of the speakers were women. And if there was a woman that was speaking on a panel, 70% of the time she was the only woman. It's pretty daunting standing up here. It is quite scary, but I think framing it in the sort of framework of this is like a struggling moment of which I can grow and develop really helps me be a little bit braver when I'm doing this kind of thing. I felt like I had a responsibility to get involved with things like this. After hearing those statistics, I was like, right, I need to contribute and be a little bit braver. So, yeah. Jobs to be done. Let's just sort of reiterate what we've learnt so far. So the job is the goal or the task that the user wants to accomplish, and they can hire a product in order to do this. So this is how they can achieve the job. We can basically divvy up our jobs to be done in 3 key areas: emotional jobs, functional jobs, and social jobs. So let's think about this in terms of the setup project. An emotional job is how it makes the user feel. So this could be, help me build confidence, that's the emotional bit, in setting up pipelines by making the process and settings easy to understand. They want to feel good when they're doing it. Functional, this is the practical, objective bit of the job. So minimize the number of decisions I need to make while setting up pipelines so I can complete it accurately. And finally, social. This is how others perceive the user. Help me showcase the value of pipelines to my team by ensuring a successful and seamless setup experience. And this is something that we found in the project. People were choosing options that felt less risky so that it didn't go wrong and their team wasn't like, what is happening? So it all goes back to Essentially feeling like this little cutie on the left here. When we think about a social job, people want to be perceived well and they want to feel good about it. It goes back to that emotional job, really, and functional. When you complete a process well and it goes smoothly, you're not frustrated, and again, it makes you feel good. So it does all go back to that emotional job, but it is really helpful to sort of divvy up your jobs into these 3 key areas. I just want to give a couple of customer interview top tips for uncovering the jobs to be done. So we want to be ensuring that we are talking to the right participants. We want to make sure that who we're talking to are the decision makers, the stakeholders, or the everyday users. We essentially need to make sure that we're talking to a range of different teams as well. So we don't want to just talk to teams that are the exact same size, industry, sort of technical maturity, because then maybe when we roll out a solution, it doesn't actually help any of our other users. We want to talk to people who have purchased our product or a similar one, so we understand their steps to hire it. Thinking back to that struggling moment, if they've hired a product, they would have had a struggling moment. What was it? Also, if they've hired a product, what were they willing to trade off? What wasn't as important to them? We also want to make the customer reiterate. So this could be playing back their answers to them. It also may sound counterintuitive, but you can play back their answers to them and get something in there incorrect. So they correct you and they go back over it. Essentially anything that will ensure that they talk about their process again. If you're talking about a process that you do every single day, you might do parts of it on autopilot, or it's easy to make assumptions about what the other person knows already, because it's second nature to them. So if we can get them to retell what they've just told us, then they might actually say it in a different way and drop in details that they left out before. And finally, have more than one person on the call and make sure you're debriefing afterwards. So everyone obviously interprets things in slightly different ways. And this is really useful to have someone else on the call with you on your side to understand how they might have interpreted something. They also might think of different questions to ask that you don't think of as well. So it's just really useful to kind of like tag team it. And obviously if there's someone there with you, you can debrief together afterwards. It's really important that you do this straight away. And you essentially want to be talking about where maybe you didn't agree, what you did agree on, what you interpreted differently. You can also talk about patterns that come up in other customer interviews. And also, I think a good way to do this is essentially writing a list of 3 things that you found valuable or that came out of that conversation. And if you do that together, it's good to like look back on as well. So, how do we then prioritize all of this stuff? Maybe you've got your jobs to be done, or maybe you've got your user stories or your features, anything like that. How do we know what to work on first? We want to deliver the highest impact work first. And one of the ways that we can do this is by asking our stakeholders. We're literally doing this for them. So asking them on a call, if you've got a few things that you don't know what to work on first, what is most important to you and why? What is least important to you and why? And this can be really, really helpful. You can also use Moscow. I feel like probably a few people would have heard of Moscow here. So essentially categorizing your work into like must have, should have, could have, and will not have. You can also use Wright, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. We can use any tool, but I think the best tools is ones that provide data to enable us to back up the decisions that we've made. If we have that data there, we can also essentially stop scope creep from happening and back up why we're not doing something. If someone asks us something and we want to say no, we can point them to the data, and that's super helpful. So, Wright scoring is essentially, you would do this per user story or per job to be done. And you would look at the reach, so how many users it affects, and then you would look at the impact. And you can score this like however you want. So I think we do it as like a percentage, but as long as you consistently do it for all of your user stories, you'll end up with like the correct sort of figures that you're looking for. Impact, does it affect business as usual, or does it affect like pretty infrequently? And then confidence, how confident are you that it's going to solve the problem? How confident does your engineering team feel? Is it like in line with their skills, or will they have to learn something else? How confident are you that there's no like security things that you need to consider? So all of that can build the confidence score. And if you times all these together and divide it by the effort, which effort is not just developer time in this. I mean, you can do it however you want, I guess, but this is how we do it. Developer time, UX designer time, product research, do you have to get marketing involved, for example, legal? All of this combines with the effort, and then this gives you your RICE score. So you'll end up with something like this, where you'll end up with your highest scoring first and your lowest scoring last. And this is never set in stone. You should always be reprioritizing. Also, you might find that there's like dependencies, and maybe you have to do number 5 before you can do number 2. That's all fine. It's kind of to spark conversation and just back up your like thoughts. It's quite interesting what comes out of this actually. And finally, what are you not solving? So it's really important. And this isn't just what is low priority. It's like, what are we absolutely not doing? So thinking about Wetherspoons, it is, I'm out of time, but sorry. So yeah, it's really successful business, but and it offers like cheap food, cheap beer, and it offers like refillables. But what is it not offering? It's not offering a fine dining experience, but it's also never trying to. So if we basically identify what we're not solving and what we're fine about not solving, then we just know that. We know what we're going to do really well. We know what we're not going to do really well. Yeah, I have run out of time, but thank you. Please find me later at our booth if you have any questions.